Hello everyone. Today I want to talk about a game that I've been playing on and off over the last year or so, and during that time it's become a comfort game for me. You know, the kind of game that I can throw on when I don't want to devote a lot of brain energy or thumb dexterity to playing something that's going to tax me or punish me for not playing it well. The kind of game where if I don't feel like I have the concentration for strategy or the manual dexterity for demanding performance, I can just sit and have a nice, gentle play with this game. This is Last Night. Specifically, it's called Last Night Rogue Rider Edition, but I don't know if there are actually other editions. I don't think there are, so I'm not sure what that's about exactly, but strictly speaking, it's Last Night Rogue Rider Edition. So, what is Last Night? Well, it's essentially an auto-runner, which is a genre of game that I typically don't get along with. You know the kind of game I mean. You typically run left to right in a 2D sort of way, and you have to press button prompts as various obstacles get thrown at you. Typically they rely quite heavily on trial and error, and memorising the order that the obstacles are coming in. And those are features of game design that I tend not to enjoy, and in combination, that's mostly going to make for a game that I'm unlikely to have much fun with. But Last Night is different, and I think a large part of that is because it's procedurally generated. So rather than the thing a lot of auto-runners do, where you kind of can't react to all of the upcoming obstacles until you know that they're coming, and then it's on subsequent attempts that you can try to remember what's coming when and react to them accordingly. In Last Night, because it varies between attempts, you aren't in a position to learn by trial and error or memorise what you need to do, so the game has to make it possible for you to react on the fly, which suits me a lot better. Unlike most autorunners, it's not a 2D left-to-right job either. It takes an almost Crash Bandicoot sort of perspective, where you are positioned behind the knight that you're controlling and riding into the screen with obstacles coming towards you along this path. I mean, you can see what the perspective is. It's right there in front of you. There are broadly 3 ways to deal with the obstacles which are going to be coming at you in Last Night. You can ride round them, you can jump over them, or you can whack them with your lance. And that's another thing that sets this game apart from other auto-runners I've played and not enjoyed. In most of them, there's a specific button prompt for each type of obstacle. You have to press A to get round this obstacle, you have to press up to get round this obstacle. But with Last Night, it's a little bit more flexible. You're generally not going to be able to jump over a spider that's dangling from the ceiling in front of you, but you could either ride round it or hit it with your lance. Either of those will work. Similarly, you can jump over fences, but you can also ride round them if they're not covering the whole path. So you don't have just one fixed way to respond to each possible obstacle. The one that's probably the most limited in terms of how you approach it is enemy knights. They will appear ahead of you and just ride straight at you. And it's possible to get round them, but that takes a bit of luck because they will home in on you, and if you try to steer around them, they will swerve to stay in your path. So the best way to deal with them really is to go straight at them with your lance. But otherwise, you have a reasonable amount of flexibility in whether you want to attack an obstacle head on or try and get round it in one of the other ways. The kind of obstacles that you'll be facing will vary from environment to environment as well. And that's something which will lead us into talking about the game modes here. The main campaign is arguably, in my opinion, actually not the main part of the game. As you would expect from a campaign mode, it's a series of levels taking you through a story of sorts, not a particularly complicated one. A princess has been kidnapped by a dragon, and you are the only knight who's remaining, hence Last Night, so the king sends you to get her back. You know, very hackneyed old stuff, but it's done sort of knowingly. It knows it's a cliched old trope. So you go through a series of levels, and different levels will take you through different environments, ranging from the early ones, which are basically just a sort of countryside lane, through caves and graveyards, and hopping across these sort of island platforms, various environments, until you get to the end of the story and accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. And the campaign mode is pretty short. I didn't time how long it took me, but from memory I'd say between 2 hours and 4 hours, somewhere in that range. So it's pretty short, and it's not super difficult either. I tend not to be that skilled at games because I rarely put enough time and effort into one single game to become super proficient at it. So if I found it kind of on the easy side, then it's probably fairly easy. But, as I said, this is, in my opinion, not really the main mode of the game. It's actually more like an introduction or an extended tutorial. The main gameplay, in my opinion, comes in the other two modes. Endless Mode and the Rogue Rider Adventure Mode, which I assume is where Rogue Rider Edition gets its name from. Endless Mode is the one that I play the most. And in this mode, you ride along endlessly, as the name suggests, and sort of cycle through different environments. So it's kind of similar to the campaign mode, except it's not broken up into levels. You just keep going, and it gets more and more tricky as you go along. So what's the point of the endless mode, then, if it just keeps going? And that was what I wondered when I first approached that mode after finishing the campaign. I'm typically not a fan of endless modes in games, because I like to have an objective. I find the lack of any kind of end goal quite demotivating. But I thought I would dabble with it and see what happens. And what happened was that I started picking up quests. Sometimes you will just be riding along in endless mode, and among the other things you can pick up, which I will return to in a second, you will sometimes find a little scroll. So I saw this scroll on the path, and I thought, I wonder what that is, I'll go and pick it up. Swerved over, picked the scroll up, and it turned out to be a quest. Now, you only actually get the quest when you die, when you hit an obstacle or fall into the water or whatever. But then it brings up this letter from a character somewhere who will ask you to do something for them. There'll be some flimsy justification for what they're asking you to do, but it comes down to things like riding for a certain distance without taking any damage. That means kind of scraping past obstacles where they're not actually knocking you off your horse and ending your life, but you sort of scrape past them. That can happen. So don't collide with anything at all, no close shaves for a certain distance. Or bop so many of this type of enemy with your lance. Or sometimes things like you need to fall into the water so many times. My favourite one, at least so far, is to travel a certain distance without collecting any coins. Because typically, as in any game that has collectible things lying around, you want to collect the coins that are all over the path. So the quest that encouraged you not to collect coins, and only rewarded you when you managed to go for quite a long stretch without collecting a single coin at all, really inverted the way that I was playing, and I enjoyed going for that one. So that kind of gives you the point of the endless mode. It's this drip feed of quests which are prompting you to try and accomplish specific things within the gameplay of the endless mode. There's also the accumulation of money, because when you do get to the end of the pretty short campaign mode, you get a message that says, to really get the ending, you have to be able to rebuild the castle, and that requires this vast amount of gold. I forget offhand what the figure is, but this enormous amount of gold, which you need to accumulate through the other modes. So that's your eventual end goal from things like endless mode. even though it doesn't have an end game itself, you're trying to accumulate this vast sum of gold to rebuild the castle. But then that, in turn, opens up some new possibilities for things. I haven't got to that point yet, but still working on it. So I mentioned that there are other things apart from these quest scrolls to pick up. And they're mostly abilities of one sort or another. You can carry one ability which you keep, sort of stashed in your pocket, and then when you pick up a second one, the first one will trigger if you haven't triggered it already manually. And these are typically quite practical things. There's one that lets you fly over gaps, so I try to hold on to that for when I enter an island environment, which is full of tricky jumps. There's one that turns you temporarily into a ghost, so you can ride through things. There's one that turns your lance into a cannon, so you can shoot enemies from further away, things like that. None of them are hugely powerful, like they will make or break your attempt at the game, but they're generally nice things to have, although the cannon can be kind of tricky to use. So you get these pickups scattered around, and as I said, some of the quests call upon you to use certain of these power-ups so many times or for a certain period of time. There's one I haven't been able to nail down so far, which is to fly for a certain period of time. I never seem to be able to trigger the flying ability at the right moment to get maximum amount of flying in any given attempt. So that's the endless mode, and that's the one that I mainly play. That's my comfort mode, because you can sit down and really concentrate and try to perform well and try to hit those quest targets. Or you can just ride along for 10, 15, 20 minutes, jump over some fences, whack some spiders with your lance, and just have a fun, leisurely time with it. And you can enjoy it equally much, whether you're concentrating or playing it in a more laid-back way. And that's what makes it a comfort game for me. It's easy to put on and just casually play it for a bit and have just as much fun as if I'm really trying. The other thing to note about Endless Mode is that it has unlockable characters, and the different characters have different quests. The quests that you pick up are specific to a particular character. So occasionally you might find a quest for a character you haven't even unlocked yet. And that's one of the other things that you can spend your gold on as well as building the castle. You can unlock new characters, and also the ability to equip yourself with certain power-ups at the start of a run. You can mix and match your character, horse and lance as well, which is really an aesthetic thing, as far as I'm aware. It doesn't seem to hugely affect performance, as far as I can tell, if at all. But it's a nice feature nonetheless. I quite like using some combination of the princess and her unicorn, or the king and his majestic royal horse, or, mixing those up. I recently picked up a Napoleon hat for the king. It might even have been while I was recording this footage. So that's fun. You can have the king wearing a Napoleon hat riding a pink unicorn. In the other mode, though, Rogue Rider mode, you're limited to just the one character, the knight. And although it does some things that are similar to the other modes, it's the same running along a track, procedurally generated, it's split up into levels, like the story campaign, it also has some other stuff going on, and this is what makes it Rogue Rider. You see, you get a choice of which stage of the path you want to go along next. At the beginning of the Rogue Rider mode, you set out from the castle, and you choose which of the, I think, 5 or 6 path starts you want to go on first. And then each stage of the path will branch off into a couple more options, and you choose which branch you want to follow at each fork in the road. Another thing that Rogue Rider mode adds is permadeath. So the instant you run this knight into an obstacle, or drop in the water, or get knocked off your horse by an enemy knight, it is done. And you will have to start over from the very beginning, from the castle again, the next time round. This mode also introduces food, which will be scattered liberally across the path, at least early on. And I think the point of that is that you need to keep yourself fed as you progress, and you don't want to starve to death. My uncertainty about whether that's what's going on brings me to my main criticism of this game. It really does a bad job of explaining itself. There's a lot of stuff that you either have to figure out or basically just take a blind guess at. One of the power-ups that you can buy in Endless Mode is this kind of rope, which attaches you to your horse. And I think what happens with that is that if something would knock you off your horse, then the rope kind of keeps you attached and it's possible for you to get back on the horse, but it's only ever happened to me a couple of times. I'm not clear on what triggers it. I would have thought that something like an enemy knight hitting you with their lance would knock you off the horse, but it doesn't. It just ends your run. And it's really not clear to me why you very occasionally fall off your horse. It's not clear what the trigger is, and it's not clear how to use the rope, whether it's actually possible to get back on the horse or not, or whether it just drags you along the ground. Whenever it's happened to me, I've just been dragged along behind the horse. So I'm really not clear on how the rope works. And it's similar with food. The little that I do know about how food works in Rogue Rider mode, which is the only mode where it appears, is based on me reading up a little bit on the Steam forums, because I couldn't figure out what the food was for, so I went looking for it. Apparently, if you eat a lot of food, it will make your knight or your horse larger, so you don't want to do that, because it affects your mobility and agility. But it wasn't clear, apart from that, what the food was about. And I think the game really needs to do a much better job of explaining what's going on and what certain things are for and what certain mechanics are. Now, there are games out there where figuring out what the mechanics are about is part of the game, but that doesn't feel like the intention here. It feels like the game just assumes that certain things are obvious when they're really not. And that would be my main suggestion for improving Last Night. There's some stuff that I still don't understand, even after playing this game on and off for a year or more, because the game doesn't give you enough feedback on what's happening with them for it to be clear how it works. So, my understanding about the food in Rogue Rider mode is that later on in that mode, you will start to come across less and less food, and you will run into a risk of starvation ending your run, which is consistent with the fact that it seems to be taking inspiration from roguelikes. Hunger clock is a big thing in roguelikes. I've never survived long enough in this mode to get to that point, so I can't speak from personal experience on that one. Based on the Steam forums, that seems to be what they're going for. But the game could really do with making that explicit. Still, it's a relatively minor niggle in a game that I otherwise find solidly enjoyable. It's never blown me away. It's not a game where I would go, you have to play this, it's so special. But it is really solidly enjoyable. I've enjoyed it every time I've sat down with it. And again, its big selling point, its big strength for me, is the fact that it's so easy to just sit down and play for a bit. If I don't want to have to focus a lot of concentration on planning strategy or trying to perform tricky maneuvers. It's not that it has no challenge, it does have challenge, but it doesn't leave you feeling like you've been smacked around if you don't play perfectly. I did wonder whether the game would start to get repetitive, especially in Endless Mode. If you're just riding along, dodging obstacles, picking up gold coins, whether it would just get samey, but so far it hasn't. If I sat down and played it for several hours a day for a couple of weeks, maybe I would tire of it, but that's not how I've been playing it, and that's probably not the way to play this game. At least in the way I've been playing it, picking it up from time to time for a bit of a play, sort of going through a burst of playing it for a few days here and there. I've found that the variety in environments is enough to keep it from feeling stale. Because the environments do behave quite differently from each other. You will come across different kinds of obstacles and different enemies in the different environments, and some of them can be pretty hairy. I tend to have a tough time with the cave and the graveyard. So for me, Last Night Rogue Rider Edition, don't forget that bit, offers a nice, comfortable, relaxing way of playing a game. And relaxation, for me, is the main reason that I play games in the first place. I don't play them looking to challenge myself particularly. I play to chill. That doesn't mean that I only want to play really easy, unchallenging games, but it does mean that I like to have access to some games where I'm not going to feel adversarial with them, like the game is trying to make me fail all the time. And Last Night really fills that niche for me. It's not perfect. There are parts of the game where, as I say, it could be a lot clearer about what's going on. There are aspects of it that frustrate me because I still haven't figured out what they're doing. But the fact that it's easy to dip into for a short play here and there, and I can concentrate as much or as little as I feel like and have as much fun either way, plus the fact that it has these two much longer modes in addition to the story campaign, means that I can keep coming back to it over time and still have plenty of fun with it. Now, having said all of that, why don't we go into a bit of a live play, and I will show you, live and unfiltered, a bit of gameplay of Last Night. Alright, so let's get started playing some Last Night. I'm in Endless mode, and I've decided to be the king wearing his Napoleon hat, but also riding a pink unicorn, which you can't see right now because of his billowing cloak, but I'm sure you'll see it as we go along. Those are his quests on the left. I can't remember what the exact details of those two quests are, but it doesn't matter. Let's just get going. He rears and off we go. Incidentally, whenever I've been playing Last Night, I always get this music stuck in my head, this sort of vaguely heroic galloping music. Hop over some fences. You get a knight running away from you occasionally in this mode. I'm not sure what those are about, but I always lance them. Because they don't seem to be on my side, particularly. So we've gone straight into some caves, which tends to be a little bit tricky. Sometimes these green things that you see on the floor start glowing, and in those cases you have to attack them, it turns out. I don't know why, but that seems to be the way it works. And now we're into the islands. So you can see narrow bridges and assorted little... Whoa! Yes, off you go. Assorted little islands dotted around that you have to leap between. The bridges tend to fall down if you jump on them, which can be a little bit harrowing. I don't even know what happened there. Okay, safely through the graveyard, collecting some gold, back onto the normal road. Off we go. You get a little bit of slow motion dramatic thing going on whenever you successfully defeat a knight in a joust. But only for as long as you're holding the button, then it stops. Okay, lava area. Dragons, no dragons? Phew. Okay. I thought there might be a dragon ahead. Those tend to be bad news. Oh god. There we go. Managed to get it somehow. Okay, take him out. There we go. Oh, okay, this is actually getting pretty stressful now. I had to knock that log down so I could cross the river. I can't believe I'm actually doing as well as I am while talking. Usually, while I'm commentating, I play like complete garbage. And that spider hugged me to death. Guess I didn't see it in time. Oh dear. So this has been Last Night, Rogue Rider Edition. Links to places to buy the game will be in the description box below. Thanks for watching, as always, and until next time, bye for now.